Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. After what the UK's Daily Mirror newspaper described as the most divisive, vile and unpleasant political campaign in living memory, the people of the United Kingdom are going to the polls to decide whether they want the United Kingdom to remain inside the EU or to become the first country to leave the 28-nation bloc. Opinions polls suggest a very close result, with the outcome likely to be known around 7 a.m. GMT Friday, that's 3 p.m. Beijing time. Why has this referendum been so divisive, and what difference could a leave vote mean, not just for the United Kingdom, but for the rest of the world too? Joining me in the studio is Frank Seron, Beijing correspondent for Handelsblad Business Daily, and Brian Sauter, a broadcaster and journalist. But first, let's look at this.
Aboard his Brexit battle bus, UK Prime Minister David Cameron summed up 6 months of campaigning in a single word: together.
If we want a bigger economy and more jobs, we're better if we do it together. If we want to fight climate change, we're better if we do it together. If we want to win against the terrorists and keep our country safe, we're better if we do it together.
Leading Leave campaigner Boris Johnson was visiting a fish market in London, insisting there's something fishy about Brussels interfering in Britain.
60% of the law of our country coming from Brussels, our entire fisheries controlled by Brussels. So you take back control, and I think it will be a big moment for democracy in this country and around Europe.
While others see Thursday's vote as a possible liberation day.
We can vote to take control of our country back. We can vote to get our borders back. We can vote to get our pride and self-respect as a nation and in who we are as a people back.
The UK's referendum appears to be part of a wider Euroscepticism in capitals across the continent.
Europe is not in good shape. Let's not be deceived about that. Now we have to realize that Europe, which is in true crisis, needs to redefine its vision and prospects.
And the British Prime Minister says come Friday morning, if Britain's still in the European Union, the campaign for reform will only just be getting underway.
Very big moment for democracy, to be tested yet at the same moment, should I say. Now, Brian, as a British citizen, are you in favor of leave or stay, and why?
Personally, I'm very much in favor of staying. I think in many ways it's a no-brainer. If you look at all the negative things that will happen if Britain were to leave, I should say United Kingdom were to leave, because it's not the same as Britain, but I think the British public generally will not be so stupid. They may be stupid at times, but they're not going to be that stupid. I think it'll be a definite stay. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but in the same way as we predict the results of football matches using octopuses, or octopi, I think one calls them nowadays, Ollie the Octopus in Manchester's SeaWorld has predicted it'll be a Remain vote. So I think we can all be quite happy about this.
This funny gentleman, Mr. Paul, has made his prediction about the leave or stay campaign. Now, you are a guy from Germany. Mm-hmm. Germany and France have both said they want the United Kingdom to stay inside the European Union. Now, personally, why do you think it is very important for the UK to be an integral part of the European Union?
The first reason it's very important because we need someone to share the bills with. If Great Britain would leave, we would have to pay the bills on our own, and we don't want to do this. But that's only one reason. The second reason is that we are stronger together. But we have to sit down and have to start to reform the European Union in a way that we are much more efficient. And therefore this wake-up call, which comes from Great Britain now, is very, very important for the European Union.
Do you think this referendum actually first came from the idea of the UK's Independence Party, which said since 1975 the UK has not been able to have a say about whether they should remain with the European Union or leave it alone? Now, why do you think the UK Independence Party is gaining momentum in its campaign for leave?
I think the UK Independence Party has been campaigning this for a long time. If anything, the question mark was when David Cameron actually called the vote, because before he called the vote, we didn't have all this problem with refugees flooding over Europe. And I think he thought then, probably, that it would be a very straightforward issue. We'd get rid of it altogether. The United Kingdom Independence Party could be put aside and they could carry on with governing. The problem is that they announced the date, and after that we then had these problems with refugees flooding all over Europe, which then gave a momentum to the UKIP, wanting people to leave, and there's a lot of voters who were very, very upset by the amount of refugees flooding Europe and the possibility of many refugees coming into the UK, and in that sense it swung the vote, the opinion vote, before the actual vote, of course, taking place. No.
Frank, do you agree that it's the issue of immigration that has seriously divided the spectrum of public opinions in the UK?
Yes, I totally agree. This was very important.
And then Chancellor Angela Merkel should be the first to take the blame among all other senior leaders of the European Union, right?
Probably that's a bit too easy.
You got a strong mixed feeling.
That's a bit too easy. I think she did a mistake at the beginning to basically open up the gates too wide, but now we all together found a solution. But still people are very skeptical, people are afraid, people are scared. Sometimes not for a good reason, but it doesn't matter. They are voters, so we have to deal with their feelings, and for this reason it's very important as well that England is going to stay in the European Union, that we can solve these problems together. Otherwise we are separate. We can't find a common way to deal with this problem.
Brian, let me go back to the appeal of the UK's Independence Party. Why do you think one of its leaders said at the rally that by voting leave, the majority of the UK would be able to take back the control and take back their self-respect in many ways?
Yeah, this was Nigel Farage, the leader of the UKIP party, and the point he was making has a lot of resonance within the UK. A lot of bureaucratic red tape comes out of Brussels. Now, the reasons for that, people conveniently forget, because one of the main tenets of the European Union is the fact it makes a level playing field so that everybody can trade with one another under the same conditions. By doing that, you have to have the rules which apply to the way you can do trade, the way you can label goods, all the things like that. They have to be common across all the different members of the Union. Otherwise, people are not playing on the same level playing field. And therefore, that by itself brings up a lot of red tape. And it's quite interesting if you look at the way the opinions have swung in the lead up to this vote, that big business on the whole is in favour of staying in Europe, and small businesses who are absolutely swamped with red tape and having to fill in all kinds of forms they really don't want to do are against staying in Europe. It's quite a large divide along business lines like that.
Here is a big question for both of you gentlemen. Why the rest of the European Union are willing and ready to give up part of their national sovereignty? In return, they're going to be a member state of the European Union. However, at the very beginning of the discussion on having a collective future for the European Union, the United Kingdom chose to be outside the single currency, maintaining its own British pound. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise that there are so many Eurosceptics in your country from day one of this discussion throughout the whole of Europe. So why do you think your country has been so divisive? Why do you hold so dear the idea of maintaining your own currency, which is of course a very important symbol of national sovereignty?
Let me ask you one thing first, is what do you mean by Eurosceptic? Do you mean Eurosceptic or Eurosceptic? In other words, it's not a silly question. The euro itself, Britain was arguing long ago, was a ridiculous system because it meant that all the different countries had to have the same interest rates and had to be under the same conditions for the economy, which they cannot do. Everybody is running at different speeds, and we've seen this with Greece and with Spain and with other European countries where the euro has been a disaster. And if you look at the rules of people wanting to join the EU, one of the rules is that the new countries have to take the euro as their currency. It's been proved to be a system that does not work. So the fact that the UK can sit back proud and say, we told you so, we were right.
Yeah, he's totally right. This was a big mistake at the beginning, to force everyone to take the euro, because this was a big burden for weaker countries. And probably if we could do it again, we wouldn't do it again. We would give the smaller countries a membership, but then they have time to adjust within their own currency. And after a while, when they're strong enough, they can join the euro.
I'm surprised you said so, because after all, the European Central Bank is located in Berlin, and Germany has benefited enormously from, for example, reduction of the labor costs and the free movement of the people, free movement and the flow of products and services
But they
across
suffered
the
as
traditional
well.
border of the Schengen agreement, the member states.
But they suffered as well in the case of Greece, because we have to pay it at the end of the day. If we lend money to Greece and they can't pay it back. So the gaining and the suffering is kind of balanced, but it would have been much better to do it step by step.
Frank's absolutely right. Nobody's actually gained out of this disaster of the euro. Greece has obviously suffered very badly, but the countries like Germany and so on, who have been lending the money and probably won't get that money back in a hurry, are also suffering. It's been a disaster through and through.
Do you think Greece is the price you have to pay for maintaining not only single currency but also fiscal unity, and eventually, hopefully, you're going to have the political unity? So far, none of the rest of the two have been achieved.
Probably.
I mean, fiscal unity and political unity.
Probably it is a price, but we have the same in Germany. Bavaria is earning all the money for Berlin because Berlin is not making money. But within Germany, it's kind of normal. And the problem was, within the European Union, it is not normal for the Germans to pay for the Greece. The cultural differences are too big. We have to get, at the end of the day, into this direction that the stronger ones are going to pay for the weaker ones. But now it doesn't really work.
And well, it's not just a question of that. It's also when you look at the different conditions. I mean, people retiring earlier in one country than another. People not having made provisions for their retirement, which one could say that the UK retirement system was very good at one stage before it was decimated. A lot of people in the richer parts of Europe look at the poorer parts of Europe, especially southern Europe, and say they've brought it upon themselves. Why should we pay for them to get out of their own mess?
They don't even pay taxes.
Yeah.
You not only have the problem, economic woes from southern European countries like Italy, Greece, Spain and Portugal, the PIGS economies. You also have immigration from, or migrants from Central and Eastern European countries where at the same time they were facing very strong anti-EU feelings. Having said that, why, Brian, on the one hand we are impressed by such an international cosmopolitan city like London, where you see a big number of overseas immigrants, I mean people, tourists, whatever. London gives us a strong feeling that it's able to accommodate a big number of overseas guys. I mean, by overseas guys, I mean not purely British people. So it seems you have developed a spirit of a broad tolerance. At this moment, why did you decide to say no? Enough is enough. We have to say no to immigration.
This is a classic case of Great Britain not wanting Europe to dictate the terms. Mm-hmm. Yes, the United Kingdom took in loads of immigrants in the 1950s from the Caribbean. They took in loads of immigrants from countries like Uganda when there was problems with Idi Amin. We have had a history of taking in loads of immigrants, and there's a very diverse culture within London especially, but in the southeast of England generally. But again, also if you look in the north of England, there are large amounts of Pakistanis and Indians and so on in certain cities which show how many different nationalities there are within the UK, and it works very well to a degree. What Great Britain really dislikes is the fact they're being told by Brussels how many they've got to take in. And thank goodness most UK people feel that we're not in the Schengen zone, because the Schengen zone allows free movement of anybody who, say, if a Chinese person wants to go to visit France, they would be able to come into England, but they can't because it's not part of the Schengen zone. They have to get a separate visa for that.
That's one of the major problems with the Chinese, who actually don't care so much about the Brexit issue. Yeah. But you are watching Dialogue with Mr. Frank Seron and Mr. Brian Salter. We're discussing the current referendum, which is used to decide whether the UK is to stay with the European Union or leave it behind. We'll be back in a short while. Welcome back, Brian. One of the main bones of contention is that some see as moves towards the creation of a United States of Europe. Is that fear-based in fact, or is it scaremongering by the anti-EU lobby?
I think it's actually based on fact, because a lot of people don't want to see United States of Europe. But I think if you look long term, and I'm talking minimum 50 years from now probably, you're going to see United States of Europe. It's going to happen, because the way the world is changing, you have the United States of America, I think you'll have the United States of Europe, you'll have the United States of Asia, it might even be called the United States of China, dare I say. But the world is going to break up into these large bodies, and I think it's inevitable. Having said that, you can understand that if the EU, which part of its foundation is committed to forming United States of Europe, when people are upset with a lot of what the EU stands for and the rules and regulations and red tape that it imposes, you can see why many people fight against the United States of Europe.
And if the European Union doesn't succeed in becoming the United States of
Is
Europe,
that a real threat that the EU is likely to fall apart? Is that what you say in your understatement?
It is possible. Yes,
Why?
it is.
Why is it
because,
possible?
They
because
don't
of the
feel
refugee crisis?
No, it's
the debt
much
crisis?
bigger. There are much bigger reasons. They don't
terrorism?
they don't feel the competition right now. That's a big problem. The competition which is rising from Asia, the competition of United States of America, they still feel like being a Europe 100 years ago, where they were running the shows, where they were setting the rules. These times are a long time over. And the Europeans need to feel the competition, because if they don't feel it and they're not going to succeed, they're going to disappear.
It's analogous
still
to
Europe, but they're not going to play any role.
Yeah, it's analogous to
politics.
America. For the last century, was leading the world, and now it's China's turn. But Americans don't like to see that. They are holding back. And in the same way, the Europeans before that, they still don't see the time is changing, and people don't like change. And I think the world is changing, whether people like it or not.
I'm a little bit confused, gentlemen, as to with whom you compete as a regional bloc, such as the European Union, against China, the United States, or other emerging markets. Why do you think there's the lackluster performance of any competitions on the side of the European Union?
Because you have different ideas of how you're going to rule the world, of the common rules. And
you're talking about the idea of a global governance, are you?
Yes.
Okay. What's your take?
I think part of the problem is there's so much, so many different views within Europe that we can't agree on a common point of view in Europe, let alone with the rest of the world. Every one of the 28 nations within Europe has its own idea about how to do almost everything. There's no consensus on almost anything, and therefore to expect it to act as one voice is really asking too much of it.
What do you think of the enormous efforts at the very beginning of forming this regional bloc and integration to build a consensus? So far, I mean, only in the area of foreign policy making, you're gonna fall apart. You're gonna have a disagreement. But on economic matters, I think the European Central Bank has played a pivotal role in stemming the crisis of the Greek debt. So. Why is it so difficult to build consensus since you have decided to form the regional bloc?
In Europe, we have so many different languages.
But the Chinese admire Europeans for being multilingual.
Maybe, but it doesn't help in decision making, and everybody has their own agenda. And when you see another nation within Europe speaking a different language, having a totally different culture, having totally different values, it's very difficult to get consensus.
Perhaps it's the economic slowdown the world over that has somehow undermined the confidence of the Europeans in general about their economic prospects. It's not
definitely. If you have less money, you're going to fight more about the money you can get, and that's one big problem. And the crisis in Southern Europe are effect of this economic slowdown, actually an effect of the financial crisis in 2008-2009.
So far, regrettably, we don't have a voice that stands for leave. Both of you are in favor of stay. Now, what will be the consequences arising from a leave vote, Brian?
I think there'll be a lot of consequences. First of all, in terms of the City of London, which is a huge financial centre, many countries use the City of London as an entree point into the rest of Europe and for its banking. Now, it's been quite interesting how in this run-up to this vote, the French have been making overtures to the British banks saying, you know, leave Europe and you can come and set up in Paris. It's a great place to set up.
Or in Frankfurt.
And Frankfurt as well. But Frankfurt's there already, of course, but Paris wants now to get that in competition. I think there's been a lot of debate as to really, is there really that much advantage of staying in Europe? Many people say, of course, you know, it's easy to forget about all the good things that happen from being in Europe. It's there, people take it for granted, and they therefore don't question it. One interesting thing is that if you look at, say, Northern Ireland, I would expect Northern Ireland will vote almost 100% to vote to stay within Europe. Because, can you imagine a new border controls between the Northern Ireland and Eire, which is unimaginable what would happen. So you're going to get parts of Northern Ireland being very, very strong Remain. London, for the City of London and for the big businesses situated in the south of England, will also be Remain. The interesting part is what happens in the north of England, where you've got a lot of dissatisfaction with the red tape from coming out of Brussels, and where they don't like the competition being imposed on them from the common market rules.
And there's actually one advantage if United Kingdom would leave. The shock for Europe would be bigger, and it would be probably more likely that they're finally going to start real reforms and not continue to sit down and to discuss.
Should the electorate in the United Kingdom decide to stay with continental Europe, then the deal that Prime Minister David Cameron negotiated back in January and February with the European leaders about having special status for the UK within the 28-member bloc, that will go into effect immediately after the vote is completed. How special is that status? Do you think that will be the envy for other member states of the European Union?
No, I don't, because in fact he made a lot of song and dance about all the things he was going to get out of Europe, and when he actually came back he had to almost walk with his tail between his legs, as we say. He didn't get everything he wanted. He got, yes, some concessions, but to be honest, they weren't really mega concessions, and I don't think it'll make that much difference. I really don't.
Frank,
yeah, totally.
Are you ready to accept concessions? To what degree do you think a special status is likely to be granted to the United Kingdom so that they could leave?
If there's a special status, it has to be a special status which suits Europe as well. It makes no sense to have special status for every country.
Then the Independence Party, the UK, would still be angry. They would still call for,
then we need to sit together and to see in detail what they want, what they need. But I'm not in favor of special status for United Kingdom, and then Denmark comes, and then Greece needs a special status. And at the end of the day, Brussels is less powerful than it is now already.
But I think a very interesting case study is what happened to Greenland. Greenland, as you know, is a territory of Denmark, but it's separately negotiated an exit to the EU. So although no nation has left the EU, part of a nation has. Now, Greenland negotiated their exit on the basis that all the seas around Greenland, which is it's a huge country, but tiny population. I think somebody even said that, you know, the amount of people working in one office block in Shanghai is bigger than the population of the entire capital of Greenland. But their whole economy depends on fishing. And they were seeing all these European boats coming along with their huge trawlers, taking the fish from the sea in front of them. And because that was hurting their economy very badly, they negotiated, and it took 3 years to negotiate this, they negotiated an exit from the EU. Now what's interesting is the fact that they are considering rejoining the EU, because having built up their fisheries and having become the envy of so much of Europe in the way they run the fisheries, they are thinking of rejoining the EU at the very time that a third of Danish voters are talking about leaving the EU. So it could well be that you've got actually one country, Denmark, which includes Greenland, Denmark wanting to leave and Greenland wanting to stay. It's a total mess.
It is. The UK is one of the 10 member states who pay more into the EU budget than they get out. Only France and Germany contribute more than the United Kingdom. In 2014 and 15, Poland was the largest beneficiary, followed by Hungary and Greece. If the UK votes to leave, Brian and Frank, if your country decides to leave, could you envisage a scenario in which other European states follow in similar manner? Is the Brexit vote being seen as the end of the wedge as far as the rest of the Europe is concerned?
Yes, definitely the thin end of the wedge. We've already mentioned Denmark, where there's a very, very strong campaigning within Denmark now to leave the EU, and the opinion polls there are showing a third of Danish voters want to leave, and I think about a half of Danish voters actually want a referendum on the matter. Once Denmark goes, that's going to affect the whole of Scandinavia. You're then going to look at people down in the south of Europe who are seeing this and thinking, well, maybe it would be better without being part of the EU. It's going to have a tremendous effect on the EU if Brexit were to happen.
There's another effect. We have elections in Germany next year in autumn 2017. So if the people are going to feel that they have to pay more and they can get less, they're going to vote against Europe within a national election. And probably then some more radical parties gain in power, and even Germany will be more difficult to govern than it was before. So this is a risk as well.
But let me go back to one of the points you came up with a few minutes ago. It's about the issue of reform. Should the UK decide to leave the European Union, what kind of reforms would be undertaken as a result, Brian?
Well, the first thing to remember is that if Great Britain were to leave the EU, it wouldn't be totally disastrous, because there's not going to be a doomsday scenario that everything's going to fall apart. Many things would stay the same.
For example, what would the members of parliament do in the wake of this referendum? Half of the Conservatives, the members of parliament, agreed to leave, right? And but none of perhaps a few of the Labour Party, 5 of the cabinet members also agreed to leave. What about a majority of the members? Because they have to have some kind of policy deliberations and policy hearings before they make up their mind.
Yeah, but you have to remember that in the UK you have what's called a 3-line whip system, whereby when there's something as important as this, the party tells its own MPs how to vote. They don't have a conscience vote, if you like. That would be very important. Remember also that if Britain were to leave the EU, there are still free trade agreements that are set up. The European Free Trade Association, EFTA, was set up long before the EEC was actually formalised in the first place. And many people are arguing that if Great Britain were to leave, it could rejoin all these free trade agreements, which might be turning a blind eye to some of the problems that would create. But look at places like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and so on.
But Schäuble, our finance minister, was also already saying there's no way sneaking in through the back door. So
true, but then, bearing in mind that the UK is the 5th largest economy in the world, it's going to be difficult for the rest of Europe to say, hey, go away, we don't want you at all. But it's a fine dividing line, of course.
Why do you think President Obama called for the UK to stay with the EU?
Because UK, being English-speaking, and America is semi-English-speaking, they see that as a very easy way to get into Europe when they need to. Without doubt, that trade would be totally changed if Great Britain was not part of the EU. You wouldn't get all the free entry into the rest of Europe.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Tomorrow, we'll continue our discussion about the Brexit. Until then, goodbye.